So by way of introduction, my name's John Deal, as Doug shared with you. I've been with Hartford Funds for a real long time, but really for the past 20 years, I've been studying aging and longevity, not just in the United States, but around the world, and not just as it applies to financial services, but really through our partnership with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, as well as other subject matter experts. I have really been doing this now for a long time as well. And basically, my team and I travel the country, usually 2 to 3 cities a week, speaking to folks just like yourselves about what we're learning around the topic of aging and longevity. Tonight's presentation we call Retain Your Brain. And it's going to be a departure. I speak very little about markets and security selection because there are people far more qualified to do that than I. But tonight we're going to talk about a key ingredient of aging longer and aging well. It's taking your brain along with you. And I'm going to share with you tonight some really hopeful and new research coming from researchers who are looking at cognitive health as we age. And tonight I hope to share with you a few tips coming from this hopeful recent research about small lifestyle changes that we may think about making that research is now showing can have dramatic impact on cognitive health as we age. And so 2 things I want to share with you up front. First of all, I mentioned that for the past 20 years I've been working with the Age Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The first thing I want to share with you, in the spirit of full disclosure, is that I did not graduate from MIT. I was in the half of the class that made the top half possible, if you know what I'm talking about. But hopefully after 20 years, things have begun to sink in. The second thing I want to share with you tonight, especially in relation to my content, I am also not a medical doctor. Perhaps some of you in the audience are, but here's my counsel for all of you. When it comes to lifestyle changes, especially around nutritional, exercise, whatever it may be, certainly if you're under the care of a physician, you're going to want to talk to your physician before you institute any kind of lifestyle changes, because tonight's presentation comes to us not from MIT, but actually from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mark Milstein. Dr. Milstein is a biological chemist, PhD, from UCLA. And his role today is not only in brain research, but also does a lot of speaking about the topic we'll talk about tonight. And he recently authored a book called The Age-Proof Brain. So what I will share with you tonight is that if you're interested in this content and you'd want to go a little bit deeper, I would highly recommend Dr. Milstein's book as a resource that you may want to take a look at. So Dr. Milstein puts it this way: we now have strong evidence that simple lifestyle interventions can dramatically improve brain health and lower the risk of disease today, tomorrow, and in the years to come. For me, perhaps like for many of you, this is a personal story. At age 23, I was named my grandmother's guardian. She had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and to be honest with you, 23-year-old kids don't know a whole lot, but they know a whole lot less about Alzheimer's disease and care. And so I cared for my grandmother for a number of years. And, you know, had we had an inkling in terms of what was going on in terms of lifestyle choices, so on and so forth, who knows? Maybe we could have delayed or extended it. Today, as a matter of fact, I'm caring for a very dear family member who's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease for about 10 years. We've been blessed in that it's been gradual in its progression. However, as I think about some of the things that we'll talk about tonight, I can't help but think that some of the things that my family member had done over the years may actually have contributed to that delayed onset of symptoms and severity of the disease. So tonight we're going to talk about your chronological age versus your brain's age. Believe it or not, they're 2 different things. We'll talk about the importance of brain health, and although I'm not a physician, I will try to describe for you the physiology a little bit about brain health and what researchers are currently saying are kind of the instances or the circumstances of healthy brains. And we'll also talk about financial implications, because although it's not a primary consideration, right, cognitive health is an important financial consideration as well. I should share with you that our research from MIT tells us that if we look at what concerns people most about retirement, up to age 55, our financial services industry has it pretty well figured out, because up until age 55, it's all about the money, the money, the money. Do I have enough? How long will it last? How much can I take? So on and so forth. When we hit age 65, it begins to change. All of a sudden, we see health begins to supplant money. Money comes down on the priority list because the thought is, what good is all the money if I don't have the health to be able to enjoy the things I'd hoped to? And lastly, over age 75, it's not only health, but specifically cognitive health, right? And then money number 3. Many Americans today, as they approach retirement ages, aren't considering, A, if I do need care, because I will share with you, today in the United States, if I have 2 people, husband and wife, both age 65, there's a 50-50 chance that one of the 2 will live to age 92. That means there's a 50-50 chance that one of you will live longer. And ladies, I probably don't have to share who the odds are in favor of there, right? But if we think about living 100 good years, it's important to think about these considerations. And lastly, I'm going to wrap up talking about or touching on 5 lifestyle areas that researchers say if we pay attention to, maybe implement some changes, research is showing that it can have dramatic impact on cognitive health in the long term. So let's talk about your brain's age and your age. Believe it or not, your brain may not be the same age as you, at least functionally. How do we know this? We know this because there's a group of people that we call super agers. How many of you have ever heard of blue zones? In fact, Netflix, if you have Netflix, there's a new Blue Zones special about secrets to living to 100. Blue zones are areas, geographical areas in the world where people are observed to live longer. So there's one in Sardinia, there's one in Greece, closest one to us is Loma Linda, California. But the question is, if we can observe longer life, what is it that's contributing to that longer life? Is it social connection? Is it nutrition? Is it exercise? The answer is yes, by the way. But as we look at those characteristics, we can begin to see what it is in people who not only are living longer, but these superagers are people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who are displaying the cognitive health of a 20 or 30-year-old, measured in terms of the ability to focus, memory recall, and the like. So the question would be, what are the contributing factors, and is there a way that we can change our lifestyle to kind of match or mimic some of those things that are leading to great cognitive health long term? So before we get into that, we want to get, anytime we're considering kind of where we're at, where we want to go, we have to start from a foundation. So how do we get a sense of our brain's age? Well, Dr. Milstein says there are 5 questions that we need to be thinking about. Now, these 5 questions, I'm going to disappoint you. I can't give you objective standards to say you're probably looking at number 4 and saying, how fast can I walk? I'm not going to be able to say, if you don't walk at least 3.7 miles per hour. No, it doesn't work like that. Here's what these questions are. They're questions to ask yourself that you don't even have to share the answers with anyone. They can be questions you ask of yourself and ask of yourself over time to begin to assess, how would I judge my own cognitive health, where I'm starting from? So, for instance, how well can I manage my day? Now, I'm not talking about I misplaced my car keys, right? Everyone does that. What I'm talking about is remembering important events or information that help us manage our day to day, where we're not getting lost in certain days or losing track of certain days in terms of what's happening. How well can I remember important information? This is interesting. Dr. Milstein says our memories are kind of like a muscle, right? Memory needs to be exercised in order to keep it sharp. So let me ask you a question. How many of you in the room can remember your household phone number from when you were a child? How many of you in the room, if you had to call your son or daughter right now, would be able to tell me exactly what their phone number is? A slightly lesser number. You know why? Because since the early 2000s, when this thing rolled out, we're told to offload everything that's in our mind onto our phones, right? There's a problem with that, in that it sometimes can hamper memory recall. Dr. Milstein says it's not such a bad idea. from time to time to turn over your grocery list. Try to remember what was on it. Turn over your to-do list. Try and recall what was there. So memory needs to be exercised. How well can I remember important information? The third one, how well can I move and maintain balance? So when we talk about balance, believe it or not, one thing we will do as human beings when we meet someone for the first time, probably not even thinking about it, we will kind of mentally assess how a person is balanced, how they move, right? Because movement and balance is one indicator, because think about what happens, even when doing something like walking. When I walk, my foot and the nerves in my feet are sending important information to my brain, right? It has to sense where my foot is falling, how stable the surface is that I'm walking on. If I go for a walk outside, I better remember where I came from, right? Because as Dr. Milstein says, if our ancestors hadn't done that, we wouldn't be here, right? So recalling, right, where you were, what you were doing, it involves memory. How well can I move and maintain balance? How fast can I walk? You're starting to see more articles being written now to the fact that people who have a faster gait tend to exhibit better cognitive health over the long term. So if I were to share with you, and I'll kind of jump to the cliff notes here, which comes at the end, but if I were to share with you that there was one thing you could do every day that researchers say may improve cognitive health as much as 40 to 60%, what would you guess that it is? One thing you could do every day. Walk. For how long? 30 minutes. You're right on it. And if for 6 to 9 of those minutes, you could increase your gait over what your normal pace would be, it shows even more dramatic effects for cognitive health. So yes, walking, moving. How fast can I walk? Again, a subjective versus objective question. And the last one kind of makes people laugh a little bit. How old do I feel? What does this have to do with your brain's age? Well, basically, people who state that they feel younger, maybe than their cognitive age, are more likely to be more social, more likely to be involved in activities, physical movement, so on and so forth. So your attitude about how I feel actually can impact your cognitive health, because as we'll talk about, it impacts some of those factors that I'll talk about this evening. So 2 things we often hear when we talk about cognitive health. The first is, well, dementia, cognitive health issues, they're just part of normal aging. They're not. Cognitive health issues are not a part of normal aging, and here's a word to the wise. Probably about a decade ago, as we were studying longevity and that kind of thing, physicians sometimes were hesitant to diagnose dementia, even Alzheimer's disease, or what was suspected to be Alzheimer's disease in its earliest stages. Why was that? Because what's the point of saying to someone, I believe you're in stage 1 or 2 of Alzheimer's, if there was no light at the end of the tunnel? That patient every day has to wake up and say, is today the day, right? I did forget my car keys somewhere, is this it? Well, what we're now finding is that early diagnosis or that early consultation is extremely important, because A, there are pharmaceutics that can now be used, but also the implementation of some of these lifestyle changes I'll talk about may have an impact on delaying the onset of those symptoms. The second thing that we hear, I probably hear more often than the first one, is, well, I have relatives who had Alzheimer's or dementia. My grandmother had it, my mother had it, surely I'm going to get it. Researchers say that 95 to 99% of dementias, and including Alzheimer's disease, are not genetically determined. So I said not genetically determined. Genetics are a factor, but you can be genetically exposed to these diseases. It's not determinative that you're going to get it. In the 1 to 5% cases that are deemed genetically determined, most of that falls in the category of the early onset Alzheimer's disease. Unfortunately, if that ran in your family and you are genetically linked to that, sadly, that may be a disease progression that is highly likely to occur. Well, if 95 to 99% is not genetically determined, but genes are a factor, what are the other factors? That's what we'll talk about this evening. So a bit about physiology and what happens and what's key to brain health. First of all, understand that beginning at age 40, your brain will lose about 5% of its mass every 10 years. What we want to try to do is keep that brain as plump and healthy and full as it was at earlier points in our lives. And how do we do this? Well, one of the things that happens is that your brain is a 3-pound organ and sits atop your body. That 3-pound organ will generate what we call 5 pounds of brain trash a year. What is brain trash? Brain trash is the leftover residue of chemical reactions that are happening in your brain. So leftover chemical residue, it may also take the form of plaques or tangles. Perhaps you've heard of these. Again, as the brain communicates, it creates this chemical residue we call brain trash. So who takes out the trash? Well, actually, your body has a function for that. At night when you fall asleep, your brain will likely shrink 20 to 30% in size. Fluid will come up from your spinal column and wash that brain trash out of your system and into your body's normal waste systems and out of the body. That brain trash cleansing, if you will, and I'll talk about this more in a second, actually occurs during a specific phase of sleep. So some of you may be familiar with the different phases of sleep: light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. We'll talk about that in a second. So as we talked about this, when the brain builds up these trashes, that's what begins to affect cognitive health. Now, if any of you have followed the research on Alzheimer's disease, for example, the jury is kind of out. There's an ongoing argument right now about these plaques and tangles. Are they caused by Alzheimer's disease, or are they the cause of Alzheimer's disease? It's like a chicken and egg problem. Well, the good news is, in the last year or two, that for the first time in a long time, we begin to see some clinical approvals of new pharmaceutics targeted at plaques and tangles, and kind of, again, assisting the body in cleaning out the brain. Now, I will tell you that these therapies, A, are expensive, 2, they're in test phase, and 3, you have to qualify for admission to these studies, which allow access to these. But again, for the previous years, we hadn't seen any kind of pharmaceuticals coming through the pipeline that might even offer promise. None of these drugs is intended to, quote unquote, cure Alzheimer's disease. What they are targeted at is trying to extend the symptom onset, so allowing us to live a higher quality of life, even if diagnosed. So I wanted to talk a little bit about financial implications, because certainly they're not the primary consideration for us or family members who are diagnosed, but they are significant. So for someone who is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, the typical survival rate is 4 to 8 years following diagnosis. The issue with Alzheimer's disease, it can last anywhere from 1 to 20 plus years, and there's no real accurate way of kind of assessing what the progression of the disease will be. When we think about the medication, when we think about caregiving, and when we think about housing needs associated with this disease, we can see costs run up pretty quickly. So, if we're talking the cost of a home health care aid, and obviously these all vary based on geographic location, but cost of a home health aid is about $62,000 a year today in the United States. About $54,000 for assisted living, and about $108,000 in skilled nursing. But if you're diagnosed with a need for memory care, you can tack on additional fees on top of that. So again, as you start to think about these costs, and you start to think about, as I said, it's the uncertain progression of the disease, finances is certainly something to worry about, especially since Medicare doesn't cover the cost of long-term nursing home stays. So a lot of people find long-term care insurance, self-insurance, whatever it may be a way to deal with that. Medicaid, for those of you who aren't familiar, Medicaid does pay. However, every state's different, but all states have a test for Medicaid aid, and that is you have to prove yourself penniless. They usually have income and asset test, and unless you show a severe restriction in assets, you're not going to get paid by Medicaid. Also, you can think about, well, what if I give all my assets away? There are look-back rules. It's very complex. So you've got to be careful thinking about that kind of planning. Sum it all up, the estimated lifetime cost of dementia care is just under $400,000 today. I will share with you, I think that number's light because it also does not take into account the cost of lost productivity of your caregiver, right? Things like this, where, again, someone needs to care for mom or dad, sister or brother. And so, obviously, when we talk about brain health and lifestyle, beyond just the finances, everything that we want to do, traveling, finding a new hobby, learning new things, meeting new people, living in new places, is severely impacted by our ability to think and to process where we are, where we're going. So folks, with that as a backdrop, I want to share with you a little bit about how can we age-proof our brains according to Dr. Milstein. As I said, there's 5 or 6 areas that I want to mention tonight, and let's start with the first one, which I mentioned already. It's sleep. More and more research is showing that the quality of your sleep has dramatic impact on cognitive health as we age. So I mentioned the stages of sleep earlier, and I mentioned that brainwash that occurs. At what stage of sleep do you think brainwash occurs? Light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep? It's actually not. It's actually deep sleep. So let me explain how these phases work. Believe it or not, sometimes people say, John, the biggest problem with sleeping for me is I tend to wake up in the middle of the night. I got news for you. All of us wake up in the middle of the night. In fact, all of us wake up about 4 to 6 times because you typically sleep in a cycle that takes about 90 to 110 minutes. So you may wake up 4 to 6 times at the end of each cycle. Most of the time you won't even realize you woke up because you'll pass right into the next cycle. But here's how it goes. Light sleep. Light sleep is the phase, usually lasts 10 to 15 minutes. You start to get drowsy. Your muscles start to relax. Your heart rate slows. Your breathing slows. Your body is calming itself down, and it begins to cool, all so that you can enter into what we call deep sleep. In deep sleep is where most of the body's healing comes during the sleep process. It's where your immunotherapy system is strengthened at night. It's where bones and other tissues that were damaged during the day are repaired, right? At that rate of sleep, you are at your most relaxed state. That will last a chunk of time before you pass into REM sleep. What happens in REM sleep? And most of you know, REM sleep is where we dream. But also what happens is researchers say being in REM sleep is not that much different than being awake. Your heart rate quickens, your pulse quickens. You may wake up in a sweat, right? Your body, it's almost like being awake, except that your brain is paralyzed, the muscles in your arms and your legs, so that you can't act out on what you're feeling in your brain, right? So 3 phases, all are important, right? And now with these devices, everybody's like, how can I increase my deep sleep? How can I get more REM sleep? You can't. There are things you can do that can positively impact your sleep cycle, and we'll talk about those in a second. The reason why sleep is so important is exactly what I described to you earlier. It's during that phase of deep sleep, again, achieved 4 to 6 times a night, that the brain can wash out that brain trash that has been accumulating in your brain. So a couple of tips for you. Anybody remember the tennis pro Pete Sampras? Pete Sampras used to travel around the world with a roll of black masking tape or black duct tape in his bag, because the first thing he would do when he would enter a hotel room is tape the drapes to the wall. He would use a piece of tape to cover every source of artificial light in the room, including the little red indicator light on the television that tells you it's powered on but not on, right? Alarm clocks if he couldn't reach the plug, so on and so forth. The first question to ask yourself is, are you sleeping in total darkness, right? Your eyes can take in light even when your eyelids are closed. So you really need to ask yourself, the source of light in your room, and hopefully, and I know sometimes I break this myself, this is not sitting right next to the edge of your bed. Because the light, the blue light is a problem. But do any of you ever wake up in the middle of the night, say 3, 4 a.m., and go, I wonder what time it is? And you say, oh, look at that. I got a text from Amy. I got a message from, wow, I wonder what that says. Oh, it said something about a play. Let me see where that play is playing in town, right? All of a sudden, we're down the rabbit trail. We've engaged our brain. We're disrupting the sleep cycle. So the first point is make sure you're sleeping in total darkness to the extent that you can. Secondly, Three researchers in 2017 won the Nobel Prize for Medicine by discovering that your body has a natural clock, the circadian rhythm, the clock that keeps you moving day in, day out. One of the best things that you can do for your natural sleep cycle is get outside in natural light within the first 30 minutes of waking up. Grab your cup of coffee, sit out on the patio, walk the dog, sit on the front porch, say hi to the neighbors, get the newspaper, whatever you do. But why? Because when you take in that natural light first thing in the morning, it has the effect of resetting your circadian clock. It will actually, your body will tell itself, based on when you were out in that natural light, when it's time to fall asleep that evening. And yes, all the things you've heard about going to bed at a consistent time, not eating after 8 o'clock, all those things are true. But again, a lot of times people don't realize the importance of natural light. If you're in an environment where you can't get natural light, or it stays dark too long, whatever it may be, they do make light boxes that can be effective, but really natural light is really key. The other thing you can do, and we can all argue over the thermostat when we leave here because it's warm enough in here right now, is it really helps to sleep in a cooler environment than what you would normally be used to, right? So it's okay to pull up the covers. Why is that? Because remember I talked about those phases of sleep? We start in light sleep. Your body starts cooling itself down. If the room and the environment is already cool around you, it will ease the transition into that deep sleep. And so think about, opening a window tonight, but turning down the air a little bit. Again, I don't want to start any marital conflict, so certainly talk to your partner about it, but sleeping in a cool environment does aid your sleep. So point number one, check the quality of your sleep. If you're taking medications that you feel are disrupting your sleep patterns, Dr. Milstein says this should be a red flag. It's something that if you haven't spoken to your physician about, you certainly want to raise that, because sleep disorders associated with new medicines you may be taking, dosages, so on and so forth, definitely something you want to make sure that your doctor's aware of. So sleep, number one. Second area, nutrition. You are what you eat. Remember I mentioned those folks in the blue zones? One of the key considerations is they do eat similar diets. Those diets are largely made up of fresh foods, right? Fresh, wholesome, non-preserved food. So if you want to generally think about the types of foods you want to eat versus avoid, let me tell you this little story. If any of you have ever gone to the Museum of Industry and Science in Chicago, Illinois, I haven't been there myself lately, but they used to have a Hostess Twinkie sitting behind a glass panel that was unwrapped 10 years ago. And it looks as delicious and edible as if they opened it 10 minutes ago. Note to self, those are not the kinds of foods that you want to pursue. So today, what we know is there's this thing called the easy for me to say, gut-brain connection, right? So Dr. Milstein talks about it this way. He says, the way medical science developed in the United States, we took intense looks at individual systems in the body, which was great. That's why we have cardiologists, gastroenterologists, neurologists, because about that special system, they know a ton. But he says we're just scratching the surface of how all these systems integrate with one another. One of the things he told me is that, if I started another argument here, who likes dark chocolate versus who likes milk chocolate versus who doesn't even like chocolate, Dr. Milstein says that's all because of your brain and its connection to the chemicals in your digestive system. What triggers those endorphins in your brain that says, I love dark chocolate, right? It's the taste, it's the gut-brain connection. When it comes to food, what you want to do is look for food that reduces inflammation in the body. So when we talk inflammation, a lot of times we're thinking joints, right? Lord knows we need less inflammation in the joints, but inflammation can occur in the brain. And wherever inflammation occurs, your body is sending out kind of curing cells to try and take care of that inflammation, lessen the inflammation, take care of the pain. Only sometimes those cells mistake healthy cells from diseased cells, and your body can actually attack itself. So anything we can do to naturally reduce that inflammation is going to have benefits for brain health. There's a diet out there right now that you might hear called the MIND diet, M-I-N-D, very close to the Mediterranean diet. I'm not even going to split hairs, but the basics are fresh foods, right? Your proteins, your fish, so on and so forth, lean proteins, olive oil, fruits and vegetables, especially your leafy greens, nuts. Got to be careful of nuts. They're high in caloric content. But again, think of those regions of the world that have those blue zones. These are kind of the diets that we often see. And lastly, kind of a steady flow of beans, again, healthy source of plant protein. The good news about this diet is I'm not going to tell you you have to change everything and adhere to it 100% of the time. Dr. Milstein says that research shows that adhering to a diet that was mostly comprised of these kind of things, about 70 to 75% of the time, can reduce your risk of long-term cognitive health issues 30, 35%. If you stuck with it 100% of the time, research is saying about a 52% risk reduction in terms of when cognitive health issues appear. So again, you are what you eat. The impact of eating fresh foods, healthy diet, has the impact of lessening inflammation in your body, which is good for brain health. This next one kind of surprises everyone, because if I asked you, is stress a good thing or a bad thing in terms of brain health, what would you say? Well, you'd probably say some stress is good because it's on my slide, right? But the fact of the matter is, some stress is good. What is stress? Stress is that disruptor in your day. You get up, your day is laid out ahead of you, you know exactly what's going to happen, and all of a sudden you get the phone call, you hear the news report, whatever. It's kind of like a pebble being thrown in the pond, right? It disrupts the day and then the waves start. Well, why is some stress good for your brain? Because when something stresses you, what do you naturally have to do? You have to think, right? Oh my gosh, what is this? Right? How do I deal with it? Did it ever happen before? What happened the last time this happened? All of a sudden, we kick in. But let me just share with you, there are some terms being used in the United States now that are kind of interchangeable, but they shouldn't be. So stress, as I mentioned, is kind of that pebble in the pool. What is fear? Fear is a natural, healthy response to a clear and present danger. So for example, if when I walked in the room tonight, there was a snake behind that podium, my body, my brain is going to tell me to do one of two things. What is it? Fight or flight. And I got news for you folks. You'd have been all alone wondering where the speaker is. I'd have been out the door, right? So fear is a natural reaction to a clear and present danger. What is anxiety? Anxiety is a fear of something that may or may not exist. Anxiety says, the last time I walked in that room, there was a snake under the podium. I'm not even going in that room, right? The danger may or may not be there, but I am anticipating it anyway. And here's the problem. Scientists are now questioning whether our bodies were built for the amount of stress that is coming at us from all angles, especially through these devices that I shared with you, right? The world's upside down. It's never been worse, never going to get any better. You can turn on any cable news network you like every night and get a healthy dose of that stuff. The impact is that the question is whether our brains are overtaxed. Now, I'll give you an analogy because this is research we did do at MIT. We did it in terms of driving a car. So you, the driver, when are you most effective in terms of driving performance? I'll explain. It's not when it's a snowy, icy night and you are white-knuckling the steering wheel because you're deathly afraid of what might happen if you're out there on the road. You are stressed to the point of paralysis. Your chance of having an accident go up, it's a skyrocket. Let's go down the other end. It's a beautiful night. It's warm. Nice song on the radio. You're sitting back, long drive. You're not even paying attention to the road. No stress means you're not paying attention. Your chance of accident goes way up. Your performance is best when you're stressed enough that you're paying attention. And that's what stress does. It causes us to pay attention. However, as I said, overstress, not a good thing. So how do we deal? What are some simple steps or thoughts and there's a million of them, to deal with stress in your everyday life. The first thing is something that I thought was hooey a couple of years ago. So I took one of these online courses that our company makes us take on like stress reduction, so on and so forth. It's breathing exercises. I don't know how many of you have ever participated in one of these, but you're going to get a chance to right now. So here's what I want you to do. When I say go, I want you to breathe in through your nose, right? And as we're breathing in, I want you to think, breathe in relaxation. You're going to hold it, and then we're going to breathe out anxiety. So you ready? We're going to go. We'll do it to 3 seconds. Ready? Go. Exhale. What you just did will lower your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, give your brain a break from whatever is stressing you out. So I mentioned earlier, sometimes these things overlap. People say to me, John, I do wake up in the middle of the night and I have trouble getting back to sleep. I used to have the same thing. One of the things I now will do is just a brief breathing exercise just like that. And I will tell myself, John, it is 3:30 a.m. It is not time for your day to start. This is the time where you should be sleeping. Breathe in sleep. Breathe in relaxation. Breathe out anxiety. Breathe out whatever's troubling you, right? So along these lines, if you're into meditation, prayer, yoga, all have the same impact. Giving your brain a break from what immediately is saying fight or flight is important. Changing your perspective. You're driving down, it happened to me a couple of ways. I drove down from Philadelphia today. A couple of times I got cut off on the road, right? So you know that guy rides up the right shoulder all the way to the end. I hope none of you are sitting in here. But most of us usually have a few choice words. It can help to change your perspective. What does this mean? Any of you ever read any of the books by Stephen Covey, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? One of my favorite stories is the story he tells about when he was in I think it was the New York subway. And there was a father on the subway car that had 3 young children with him. And he said, the children were all over the place. They were like animals. They were disturbing everybody on the train, swinging from the bars. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore, and he said, Sir, would you please get control over your children? And the guy looked at him and said, I'm so sorry. We just came from the hospital where their mother passed a couple of hours ago, and I guess I'm having trouble focusing. And he said immediate. So it's what Stephen Covey called an aha moment. Right? So most of the time when we're stressed out, whether we know the information or not, we may not have the whole picture. It may help to think about changing that perspective. Maybe there's something I don't know about this situation. So again, it gives your brain a chance to break and pause. And this is really what we're talking about. It's pausing. It's what Stephen Covey called responsibility. Humans are the only creatures that have responsibility. Stimulus comes in. We can fight or flight, or we can break that pattern and take a moment to think about what just happened and what might be a healthy way to respond to it. The last exercise calls rose, thorn, bud. What is it? Something immediately stresses you out. Break. The break is, I want you to think about the worst thing that happened to you in the last 24 hours. I want you to then think about the best thing that happened to you in the past 24 hours. And the bud? I got those reversed. The best thing that happened to you in the last 24 hours is the rose. The thorn is the worst thing in the last 24 hours. And the bud is, what is the thing in the next 24 hours you're most looking forward to? Do you understand you're kind of short-circuiting your stress system in order to give your brain a break, and also be mindful that even during your day, taking brief brain breaks from whatever you're involved in is actually a healthy exercise. So managing stress, really important to cognitive brain health. If there were one prescription we could make that would be like a miracle drug for cognitive health, it would be exercise. Exercise, getting moving, is one of the best things you can do for cognitive health, because when you move, all systems are attached to your brain, including all your sensory systems, smell, hearing, sight, touch, feel, right? All that stuff is there. And making that commitment to move. And when I say move, I will share with you, I mentioned walking is already important. One of the best things you can do for cognitive health Dancing. Why dancing? Well, because again, it involves physical movement of just about everything in your body, but also you have to remember what your dance moves are supposed to be, and you're oftentimes reading your dance partner to understand what they're doing in the context of what you're doing. So your memory is involved both psychologically as well as your brain is involved physically. Moving, exercising, and whatever you like to do is really important. And mixing it up is kind of important as well, right? So maybe you've done the same routine for the past 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is. Try something new. That's really important. So we put up here a little acronym to help you think about this called CARS. What does CARS stand for? The first is Q, right? Set yourself cues. For example, if you want to go for a walk in the morning, make sure your tennis shoes, your walking shoes are somewhere almost in the way of where you're going to go, right? So it's a cue that says, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to be walking this morning. Think about your day. Are there areas where you can increase exercise just through normal activities in the day? Taking the stairs, parking a little bit further away, right? Trying to do something to strengthen your arms, even if it's in the chair that you're sitting in, so on and so forth. Flexibility, yoga, stretching, all those kind of things really important. The R is for reward yourself. Now, when I say reward yourself, please don't do something that you hate. However, also don't rule out doing everything because you think you'll hate everything, right? Get out there and play pickleball. I've never played it, but it seems like the rest of the country is, right? So it's not only the physical sport, but in pickleball, from what I hear, if you're not driving the neighbors crazy, it's an incredible social event that involves a lot of other people. But it's not, look, it's finding whatever it is, trying something new, finding something new that's enjoyable, and if you can do it with a group of people, that's more successful or more likely that you will stick with that new activity. So the CARS acronym, right, is really to think about your day, think about intentional exercise throughout your day, dramatic impact on brain health. The next area, imagine that you went to the gym every day and all you did was work out your biceps. What would happen? What would you look like after like 5 years? Like Popeye, right? No, important to overall health is cross-training your brain. So I'm not saying that crosswords aren't good. In fact, I've got a good tech hack for any of you that like crosswords. It's a website called Down for a Cross. If you've never heard it before or seen it before, they carry all the major crossword puzzles, New York Times, LA Times, for free. And you can do it with a partner. So you can bring other people in to help you solve your crosswords. I'm not saying crosswords, Sudoku, all these things are not good. They're good and they're fun. But if all you ever do is crosswords, you know what you're going to get good at? Doing crosswords, right? Cross-training means find new things to learn about, right? So let's say you wanted to pick up an instrument just for the heck of it. You're going to play guitar. Rather than picking up the instrument so that you can play Layla better than Eric Clapton, here's what Dr. Milstein says. You should pick up the guitar and learn a new song on a fairly frequent basis. Because when we learn new things, it creates new neural pathways in our brain, new synapses that need to be crossed. It expands. Remember, I talked about that lumpy, healthy brain, not to be gross, but building those new connections is really, really important. One of the things, and learning new things, when we learn new things, it releases hormones and things that can be helpful for that brainwash that I mentioned before. So when we learn something new, it can be a hobby, a physical exercise. And actually what Dr. Milstein says, if you think about your week, your month, your day, you may want to think about it this way. Look, take 1 or 2 days and explore a topic that you're always interested in, but you never really had a chance to dig into, right? Something of interest could be going to the library, grabbing some books, talking to some friends about it, join a book club, whatever it is, you're learning something new. Maybe 1 or 2 days of the week, it's to try some kind of physical activity, maybe mixing in something new. So first is kind of a mental challenge, second is a physical challenge, and the third, and the one that trips up a lot of people, meet somebody new. We have an entire different presentation we call the social portfolio. Anybody ever hear of a small arts college just up the river from MIT called Harvard? Harvard conducted a study called the Harvard Study on Adult Development. Obviously, I said that in jest for any of the Harvard grads in the room, but Harvard Study on Adult Development. You can find Robert Waldinger on TED Talks, who talks all about this study. It's the longest ever social experiment dealing with 738 men in Boston from the 1930s through present day, except now they're actually going on their second generation of this study. What did they do? Half of these men were enrolled in Harvard College in 1938. The other half of the men came from Boston's poorest, toughest neighborhoods, right? In fact, 60% of their parents were first generation here in the United States. And what did they do every year since the 1930s? They interviewed these men. They took physical measurements on the men. They looked at their physical health, mental health, and they tried to assess, were there any qualities looking back at people in their 50s or 60s that could predict not only how long they would live, but how well they would live? They actually came up with 3 hypotheses. One was the ability to make decisions on a regular basis with a base fundamental philosophy of who I am and who is the person that I want to be. A set of rules or a vision of where I was heading, and my decisions were loosely kind of tied to that vision of where I was trying to go. The second characteristic was those who responded to when life threw them a curveball, resiliency. Were they able to take the shot, rebound, and come back up? But the third and most important characteristic of long-lived, healthy life were the quality of relationships in their lives. Relationships, relationships, relationships. Oftentimes as we age, we notice that our social network begins to shrink, right? It's not only when you age, it actually starts usually in your mid-20s. When you get married, your social circle begins to shrink. If you have children, it shrinks even more. When you retire, the social circle shrinks again, unless you are intent on expanding the social network. If relationships are one of the keys to aging longer and well, and I just told you at 65, there's a 50-50 chance in a couple that one lives to age 92, we ought to be investing in relationships. I know sometimes people say, John, I'm not an extrovert, neither am I, but I'm not an extrovert, I'm not good at meeting people. Sometimes we have to force ourselves into an uncomfortable place. Try something new. Go to an activity. Visit an activity center, take up a new hobby, take a class, do whatever it is, but you got to put yourself in an environment. You know when we peak at making friends? It's at age 23. Why age 23? Usually because you're trapped in an environment with the same 200 people about your same age, 5-6 days a week, 7-8 hours a day. Recreating an environment like that's really important, folks. One of the best things you can do to cross-train your brain is meet new people. Because when I meet new people, I've got to ask questions about where do you live? Where'd you come from? What's your background? I have to remember your name. One little party tip that you can try here, because we're all amongst a pretty good crowd of people. Here's a little hint Dr. Milstein says you can use for remembering names. Now, I will add that you peak at remembering names at age 22, so let's put that aside for a second. The reason you oftentimes don't remember names is you hear the name so quickly, it's in one ear, out the other, and you haven't associated anything mentally with it. Here's what Dr. Milstein says to do. When you meet somebody for the first time, they share with you their name. Imagine that you are writing their name on their forehead with a Sharpie magic marker. Please do not write their name on their forehead, or you will not forget them and they will not forget you, right? But writing their name mentally on their forehead with a Sharpie magic marker causes you to think about the name and associate it with that person, and will enhance your recall of that person's name. So, I don't know, give it a try. If it doesn't work, you probably won't be able to find me. And don't say my name, because maybe you'll forget it by then. But learning something new, really, really important. Folks, as I wrap up, I just want to share with you, most of the time I get questions about, John, what about supplements, right? I saw that, and I'll just tell you a story. There was a meeting I was doing in California about 3 weeks ago. A woman raised her hand. She said, John, I have to tell you, I ordered this supplement about 4 months ago. I saw it on a cable TV news ad, and I got to tell you, it's made all the difference in the world. I mean, I think I'm more focused. I can remember things better. I said, wow, that's awesome. What's the name of the supplement? She said, I can't remember. All right, case in point. Sometimes I think the marketing has gotten ahead of the medicine. One of the things we have to be careful about with supplements is, number one, they're not regulated. So you don't know what additional things are going into the supplement, right? Number two, there can be a tendency to link on to the latest fad, right? So remember during COVID, we were all supposed to take vitamin D. So we all went out and grabbed vitamin D. Now magnesium's a big one, right? But we take it and take it and take it without any idea of whether we need it, what our body makeup is, so on and so forth. We would recommend that if you are going to supplement, once in a while, have a conversation with your doctor about if there's any blood work that can be done to see where you're at in terms of vitamin efficiency. Dr. Milstein even says a supplement like melatonin, often taken for sleep, is not prescribed as a frontline sleep aid any longer. Why is that? One is they don't know what else is being added into the capsules, but two is if you supplement melatonin, your body may actually stop producing as much melatonin naturally as it once did. So again, if you're taking it, not telling you to stop, especially if you're under the care of a physician, but something to think about. One thing I can tell you that Dr. Milstein says 100% linked to cognitive decline is if you're taking drowsy allergy medications as a sleep aid, please don't do it. Not the non-drowsies, it's people taking the medicines that make us drowsy because we have trouble falling asleep can be very dangerous to our long-term cognitive health. If you're doing something like that, again, talk to your physician. There may be a better way of getting from here to there. So folks, we talked about your age versus your brain age. We talked about the importance of brain health and this concept of brain trash, and I talked about those 5 areas. What I will mention is we brought along some white papers that is basically a summary of what I talked about tonight. Feel free to take them with you. There's some on the chair up front if you're exiting out that door, and my buddy Patrick in the back has them. He can make sure you get them on your way out if you're exiting up the front door. We have just a couple of minutes left. Any questions that I can take, I'd be happy to answer if I know the answer. If I don't, I'd be happy to talk to Mark Milstein.
Any thoughts on alcohol consumption?
Yes. Great question. One of the most popular questions we get. Here's the deal with alcohol. Mark Milstein said he never got a standing ovation before until he mentioned that 1 to 2 glasses of alcohol are okay on the Mediterranean diet. However, what he will say is research is out on both sides of this argument. Some research says perfectly okay to have 1 drink a day. Other research says no go. So he says when the research conflicts like that, it does come down to an individual basis, he believes, in terms of how well does your body tolerate alcohol, something to talk to your doctor about. His view is some people will be fine, some people can't tolerate it, but the big complicating factor there too is it's not just the alcohol, it's other conditions, right? So if you're diabetic, it could aggravate the condition. So something we have to be aware of. But jury's out. You know, a lot of people will say, you know, it's fine, especially on some of these diets. Just as many studies say, be careful. One thing that is true is you got to be careful because alcohol will interfere with that sleep cycle that I talked about. That's why if you have a heavy night of alcohol, you wake up in the morning, kind of feels like you didn't get a good sleep, probably because you didn't go through the number of cycles and the depth of the cycles that you would prefer to. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The importance of hearing it.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention it. So that comes in this category right here. If you didn't hear what she offered, it's the question of hearing aids. So we know that hearing aids are vastly underutilized in the United States because of the stigma that comes with having to wear a hearing aid. Men, hate to criticize you here, but that's largely where it lay. But it's across both genders. So as we think about hearing aids, why are they associated with cognitive health? Because if you can't hear, you have a tendency to withdraw. When you withdraw, you don't participate in conversations, you have trouble learning new things, you have trouble participating, so on and so forth. So Dr. Milstein says, if you suffer from moderate hearing loss, your chance of dementia increases by about 2 times. If you suffer from severe hearing loss, your risk of developing dementia and cognitive health issues increases 5 times. So if for no other reason, if you've been putting off the hearing test, seeking out hearing aids, so on and so forth, thank you for bringing that up. Really, really important to think about as we go forward. And not if just for you, members of your family, parents, friends, siblings, so on and so forth. Really, really important. Thank you. Other questions? And I'll be around for a couple minutes. Sir, one last question.
Three things I was waiting on. You didn't mention Parkinson's. Number two, I leave my radio on all night with music. Three, I have sleep apnea and I use the CPAP. How does that, the CPAP, I'm asleep in 2 minutes with the music.
So,
It takes my mind away from thinking and it goes to the music.
So two things. I can't answer you on the music thing. I know Dr. Milstein would say try to stay away from it only because it could engage your brain if you wake up inner cycle, right? Now, I say that because my grandparents used to sleep with the news radio station on all night long. It would immediately grab your attention, or a police scanner would be another one. But, you know, of all the things. But relaxing music, if it helps you ease into sleep. I would also say that you're seeing more now and now, and I have not personally seen the direct research that say that many times people are diagnosed with dementia when it really can be a result of not using a CPAP machine. Inadequate oxygen to the brain during sleep, which again robs you of the sleep cycles, so on and so forth. So CPAP, very, very important to have those breathing issues kind of looked at, oxygen levels during our sleep. But also, yeah, I don't think the music thing is a bad idea, especially if it calms the body and kind of puts you in a better restful state. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed the content in addition to food for your, hopefully food for thought.
Thank you, John.
Doug, thank you very
thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.